3, 2, 1. How do I, let's see, make this screen proper? Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Brother Augustine Show, where we seek to educate, entertain, and edify the world from an Orthodox Christian perspective, which is very important because too often our souls look like my room, where everything is just scattered and unclean. But thank God he can save us regardless. I have as my guest today a man named Tim Honeycutt, who runs a wonderful YouTube channel called Orthodox Wisdom, where he reads out passages from different lives of the saints or their books and teachings. So if you're not subscribed to his channel, Orthodox Wisdom, please make sure you go ahead and do this after you watch this video. So that said, Tim, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show and chat with us today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So I usually like to start these off just by asking someone how they found Orthodoxy, cradle, convert, even though I don't love those terms, but yeah. Were you always Orthodox or did you become Orthodox later in life?
I became Orthodox later in life. I was a couple years out of college. So I had come to faith as a Protestant in college. And then, through a series of events, came to realize that Orthodoxy is the truth.
Glory to God.
Yeah, glory to God.
Now, part of the reason, I mean, we've talked about many topics privately and publicly, you and I, but we wanted to get together today and talk about the hopeful canonization of Fr Seraphim Rose, who's written a number of books that are hugely popular, not just in the United States, but also abroad. In fact, my wife is just finishing up The Soul After Death, which I'm told is one of the most popular Orthodox books in Russia in general. So I first wanted to ask you, because you've played a significant role behind the scenes in certain things that we'll get into as this goes on. How did you first get exposed to his work exactly?
So while I was discerning the Orthodox Church and figuring out how to be a Christian, that was my main, how do I be a Christian now that I know that my basis can't be the Protestant doctrines? I was, discerning. I was going to services, trying to say the prayers, trying to be Orthodox in a small way, and not just read or talk about things, right? Mm-hmm. And I went to a church. I was having weekday services, and I had a just beautiful experience, not just at the church, but actually with the people after. And through their love and through their just interest in me and people coming to Christ, that was the day that I really realized and knew I needed to be Orthodox. And it was actually that day, but after that moment, that I was first exposed to directly, at least, Fr Seraphim Rose. The deacon there that day, he highly recommended, emphasized I buy the biography, which at that time was still being sold, was still available for sale in stores. So I was rather intimidated by a 1,000-page book. I wasn't the biggest reader at the time, and but I picked it up, and over the course of the next couple months, I just devoured that book. It was like a catechism, because I could see all kinds of things from the church history, the dogma, the experience in the life of one man. And so it was like incarnated. And so I think that book is powerful. Of course, many people testify to such thing, but for me, I treat it like it was like a catechism for me from the very moment I knew I needed to be Orthodox.
Now, who compiled that book exactly? Because I'll admit I have not yet gotten my hands on it.
Well, yeah, you and many others, unfortunately. Hieromonk Damascene, abbot of the monastery in Platina, he wrote it. I mean, he's the author. The exact details of how it all came together, I'm not exactly sure, but he's the author. And, many people contributed to it, but yeah, Hieromonk Damascene.
Okay. I've read 2 books by him, Christ the Eternal Tao, where he tries to kind of baptize Taoism, which is a very interesting book. And then a book called Created in Incorruption, which I read as an inquirer and actually exposed me to the beauty of Orthodoxy, talking about the state of the physical body, both in paradise and after the general resurrection, as well as what Christ's post-resurrection body was like. Just really fascinating stuff. Why do you think his biography is so hard to get our hands on these days?
Well, I've asked about this. I've asked Father Damascene about this, and what I can tell you is that it's a combination of things, as you might guess. It's a combination of, I think the main thing is he is writing, or maybe it's finished by now, a new edition. It's going to be the first edition after the repose of Father Herman, Father Seraphim's co-laborer from the beginning of the monastery. So he reposed in 2014. It's going to be the first edition since then. So he's asked me one time I was up there, just kind of my general impressions about Father Herman in the biography. So I know about that. Beyond that, it's mostly speculation. So I'm not sure I want to just sit here and speculate.
Okay, fair enough. I have one last question about the biography since you've read it.
Yeah.
Was there any particular story from the life of Father Seraphim that struck you, like the first thing that really hit you as saying, wow, this is the gospel incarnate, like you kind of indicated earlier?
I can't recall a specific moment or specific passage. I remember feeling, I mean, that in that time when I was learning so much about the church, it felt as though there were epiphanies daily, realizations of how what the scriptures meant in particular ways, how Christ has manifested himself in the world through history. I mean, there were so many, felt like there were so many epiphanies and so many moments of corrective enlightenment. But the book, I mean, one thing that's always stood out to me from the beginning was that Father Seraphim, in his deep search for truth, part of what brought him to orthodoxy or made him realize the truth of orthodoxy is that truth is not merely ideas or even a way of life, but it's a person, and it's Jesus Christ. And that really stood out to me as, I mean, something I knew in a way, right? Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But seeing the context of his struggle, his pursuit through all these myriad philosophies and religions, and to come to that realization that penetrated them all and cut past all the fog, that really stood out to me in the beginning. And then that's early on in the book. So everything else, it almost feels like, you might say, that's a launching pad for the rest of his time, for his 20 years as an Orthodox Christian.
Thank God.
Yeah. Thank God.
So before we get to the specifics of canonizing Father Seraphim Rose and the process, I want to zoom out a little bit and ask, because I actually don't know exactly what that process looks like in general. What I do know is that in the ancient world, there wasn't really a process of it. People just kind of have a local cult of veneration, so to speak. Over time, their stuff would be found elsewhere. And then sometimes, an ecumenical council would say, okay, this person is a saint, right? Like St. Augustine, Fifth Ecumenical Council. What does the process look like in today's world? I know it usually takes a few decades after the repose of the person. So how does that usually play out for someone to become officially canonized?
Well, it can look very different. I definitely don't feel like I've got a perfect grasp on it, of course, not being a bishop or even a priest, but it definitely can look different. As you said, some are canonized relatively quickly, 20, 25 years, like St. Paisios or St. Porphyrios. Others, it takes centuries. I was just reading the commentary in the Divine Liturgy by St. Nicholas Kabasilas. He wasn't canonized, I think, until the 1980s, and he's a 14th century author.
Wow.
So it can look wildly different, but it's all very organic, I think, is one of the main themes through all the canonizations that I've become aware of. It all starts from the ground up. It starts from the people who knew him, venerating him and praying to him. Or her, of course. It starts organically. It's not a top-down thing. There's not a checklist per se to look at for each one. But one of the main things you look for are miracles. What is God showing forth about this person from heaven? And we have that with Father Seraphim, no doubt about it. And in terms of the actual specifics, it's ultimately going to require a synod of bishops to say, yes, this person should be added to the calendar of the saints. This person their icon should be in the churches. We should have services and prayers to this person. They are a saint, and there's no longer any doubt. But it can look very different. So, I've done a few things to help push this along. But it's all up to God and his timing, as we know.
Fair enough. Now, when you say miracles attributed to Father Seraphim, are you talking about during his lifetime or that have occurred as a result of praying to him or at his gravesite, or both?
Well, certainly both, but from what I've become aware of, there's much more of a focus for Father Seraphim, focus on the miracles that people have experienced after his repose than before. He's not known like his great mentor and teacher early in his time as an Orthodox Christian, St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco, who is the wonder worker of Shanghai and San Francisco. That's not what Father Seraphim was called to be, was blessed to do. But after his repose, and even in this, you see this in the biography that Father Damascene wrote. I think in the biography, there are 11 accounts of miracles of various types, whether it's myrrh streaming icons, whether it's dreams that bore real fruit in the years afterward. There's I think just very in a passing way, there's an account of him being seen walking through the monastery or the skeet of St. Xenia 9 miles down the road in Wildwood, where he helped found that skeet monastery for women. And there's an account there where he was seen calmly walking through the monastery. There was no sound of the leaves on the ground when he was walking, but he was clearly recognized. But there are miracles that are more manifest and have more tangible fruit in people's lives. For example, one of the most powerful ones, I think, is of the priest. He's now a priest, but at the time he was a Protestant in Alaska, and he had become aware of Orthodoxy and familiar with it living in Alaska, but only just a little bit, right? And he has this dream where, and it's very vivid, right? Very vivid dream, where he sees a man he didn't recognize wearing all black. He thought I think it says he thought he might have been some kind of a wizard or something like that. Didn't have the context to understand a man in a black cassock and with a very long gray beard. And he says, he asks, "Who are you?" Father Seraphim says, "My name is Father Seraphim Rose." He says, you are to become Orthodox and become a priest." And so the man is, I'm sure a bit startled and a bit unsure of what to do with that. Well, he goes down to I think it's the seminary, and asks at the bookstore, "Do you know someone named Seraphim Rose?" And they say, "Yes, of course." And they go and show him the biography. They bring him the biography, and immediately he recognizes the man on the front cover of the biography as Father Seraphim Rose. And over the course of the next, handful of years, he not only became Orthodox, but he's now a priest.
Wow.
And so that's the kind of fruit, I think, is very difficult to deny, that the Holy Spirit is working in the world through Father Seraphim.
Wow. I didn't know any of those stories, so that's really amazing to hear.
Yeah.
Now, given that you're involved in this process, obviously you're familiar with the monastery and Hieromonk Damascene. How did you get involved with this specific thing? Like, did they say something to you on a visit, or did you ask if you could be involved somehow, or how exactly did you get involved in this thing that we're going to talk about as the video goes on.
Yeah. So in 2014 was my first visit to the monastery. It was a few weeks after I finished reading the biography. So I was not yet a catechumen, but I was eager to become one. So I visited the monastery, and for a few days in the blazing heat up there in the forest, and that was my first visit, and I was it was all very new, first time ever at any kind of monastery. It wasn't until, let's see, I think it was 2018 that or actually it was before, but we'll start with 2018, where I'd come back again to Father Damascene and asked him, I told him, there's nothing in between, say, 1,000-page biography and a biography that one could read in 10 minutes. Right. So there's so many details that people are ultimately not going to get there. I felt as though, and I'd already heard from many people at that point, that biography is so long. I'm sure it's very good. I'm sure it's great, but I can't read something over 1,000 pages, right? Very understandable. So I asked him if I could, prayerfully and with his blessing to start and to finish, write something that was more in the middle in terms of length. And so I worked on this off and on, and then ultimately got a better sense of where it needed to go, I think in 2018 or 19. Because at that point he said, well, why don't you just take the 1,000-page biography, quote it, verbatim as much as you want, and we'll say, title by Timothy Honeycutt, based on Father Seraphim Rose, his life and works by Father Damascene. Well, I thought, well, that's a lot easier than trying to rewrite it, write it, but in my own words all the time. So in fall of 19, or December of 19, I handed him a draft, which my guess is it'd be about a 150 page book or so, where it's an abridged biography. So that was the first thing. Now that's been on hold. I'm happy to let Father Damascene and his time that's allowed him to work on the big biography. I'd much rather see that come out. But God willing, maybe one day that this abridged biography will come out, and it'll be that happy medium and allow people much more access into Father Seraphim and his life. So that's the first thing, but that's the kind of thing on hold. Did I answer your question?
Part of it, yeah. And I
Okay.
really hope that comes out, because, I mean, case in point, I've never made it through a full Dostoevsky book. I have the Brothers Karamazov here. I
Yeah.
tend to make it about 150, 200 pages in, and then I can't keep going. It's too much of a commitment. And if there were a 150-page biography of Father Seraphim available, I mean, I would scoop that up in a heartbeat. But
I think,
1,000 pages, that's a serious commitment. So I can understand why some people might prefer that, certainly.
yeah, absolutely.
And so one of the things you told me, now that you and Father Damascene are talking about Father Seraphim Rose and everything, you told me that you got an icon from the monastery that you wanted to show the world on camera. Would you mind giving us a little preview of that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll show the icon, and then I'll give the story, and I can show it again, of course. But gotta get the look right.
There you go.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, wow. And they painted that at the monastery?
They did. This is, gotta get it straight. This is the work of one of the monks there at the monastery. There are icons of his all over the monastery, or icons painted by this monk at the monastery. And so the story behind this beautiful icon is, I think, starts on September 2nd, the day of his repose in 2020. And I was up at the monastery for the feast day. Given that we were still in all kinds of COVID measures and situation with all that, there was hardly anyone there that day. But I drove up for the day, and I met with Father Damascene he had a few moments, and I expressed my desire. It started to feel a burning desire to have some kind of prayers, or something to sing, to chant, to pray to Father Seraphim. It just my love for him had grown to the point where it just felt like I needed something. We needed something, and I wasn't aware of anything beyond an unofficial troparion, as well as an unofficial akathist that's already online, but I didn't know where it was from, and personally, I wasn't terribly pleased with it. So I asked Father Damascene about this, and when I asked him about the akathist that's online, he said he was aware of it, and that he also felt like it wasn't quite what we needed. And I told him I tried to rework it. I tried to take it, edit it, update it, and it just wasn't working. If there was gonna be an akathist that was up to the way I thought it should be, and he thought it should be, it needed to be written from scratch. So, having absolutely no experience writing hymns for the church, and having just love in my heart for Father Seraphim and the benefit that God has blessed me with through him in my life, I asked him if I could prayerfully, with his blessing, begin to write an akathist to Father Seraphim. And I would base it on the akathists that are already in the church, of course, the one to the Mother of God, but also the one that Father Seraphim wrote himself to St. John. And he said, yes, may it be blessed. And that day I wrote the first lines sitting next to Father Seraphim's grave, and continued doing this for the next, about 9 months or so. And my whole goal was to prayerfully find a way that's to produce an akathist that would ultimately not just be a product of my own mind, but a product of the church, right? So I got feedback from a number of people, lay people and priests, and including my spiritual father, who met and spoke with Father Seraphim Rose when he was a young man, and was actually at his funeral in Platina. So that was a beautiful connection for me, not just in general, but of course for the akathist, and having him take a look at it. And then in June of 2021, I'd finished a draft, and I had brought it to Father Damascene for his review. He and I looked it over for a couple hours. He gave me great feedback, and at the end I asked him what he thought overall, and he said, "It's good. It's very good. It does the trick." So I was delighted, and just kind of continued doing different things the rest of the afternoon. And I was about to leave that day. It was another day where I just drove up for the day, and he saw me about walking through the monastery, and I thought maybe he had already gone to his cell or something. He's like, "Oh, Tim, you're still here. Hold on a second, I have something for you." So we go sit down in front of the trapeza, and he goes and sends one of the monks over, and he comes back with this icon, and he says to me, this is for what do you say? "This is because of your love for Father Seraphim and your labor to see him glorified."
Wow.
Yeah. It's hard still not to get a little bit teary over that, because it's so meaningful to me, and I was pretty overwhelmed by the kind gift. Father Damascene said that while he was going over the akathist, he had remembered that there was this icon that was just finished within days before, and they didn't know what they were going to do with it, and he decided he wanted to give it to me. It was finished in terms of the painting, but it didn't have the final coat of the lacquer, I think it is, the clear coat to preserve it. So later that year, I went back to the monastery and was able to pick it up from the fathers there, and it's been a delight. It's been I'm just very blessed.
That's amazing. So is the monastery currently Rokor or Serbian? Because I've heard that they've gone back and forth.
They've been a part of the Serbian Orthodox Church since 2001.
Oh, for a long time.
Yeah.
So then Hieromonk Damascene would have to present this process to a Serbian synod in order to get this process moving.
Well, I think that's true, but I don't think that it's only, I could be wrong, but I don't think it's only the Serbian Orthodox Church who can do it. I can't imagine another jurisdiction, either in America or let's say Russia, doing it without, not in conjunction with the Serbian Diocese of the West, the Serbian Church in America. But these things are not, these are not things I'm totally sure about. I'm not sure who is exactly. It's a very organic process. Certainly bishops are aware of the veneration that people have for Father Seraphim. I know that firsthand, but I'm careful to try to push it in a specific way or assume certain things about jurisdictions. Ultimately the best thing would be for it to be done in harmony. And that's how what I've seen, at least of a recent canonization with Saint Sebastian of Jackson and San Francisco. I mean, there were hierarchs there for the glorification from 6, 7 jurisdictions.
Wow.
So it's normally, I think especially in America, let's say, because of our jurisdictional situation, it would be normal for there to be hierarchs from various jurisdictions at least coming and being present and blessing it, but be like one jurisdiction or maybe two that are actually issuing the canonization, and then others recognize. That's what I've seen with other canonizations, of other saints.
So do you think that your akathist would be chanted at the service if this happens, or is that something that would just get put in like the prayer book later on afterwards?
Well, that's certainly my hope. That's certainly my hope. I think that's the goal. All this is being done with, I'm doing everything I can to go through the right process, through Father Damascene, his bishop, but there's a way in which it's all organic, like I've said. But yeah, I mean, I do pray that one day I'll be there for the glorification, and we will all chant the final version of this akathist together. Yeah.
Now, before we got started, you indicated you were willing to give us a sneak preview of what you've written.
Sure.
Would you mind, up to you, either reading or chanting? This is going to be the first time I've heard this, and I imagine the first time anyone's heard this on my channel, unless you've been doing a circuit reading this on other interviews that I wasn't aware of. But I'm sure it'll be an amazing thing for us all to hear, if you would be willing to share.
Sure, yeah. I'll start by just reminding everyone this is not final. It's got to be finalized by whoever's canonizing him. But it's at a stage where it's probably at least close to what it might become in the very end. That's for sure. At least I think so. So we'll read the Kontakion and the Ecos of the akathist. Chosen confessor and glorious ascetic of Christ, who illuminest the whole world by thine inspired words and thine enduring love for man, we glorify thee, who ever intercedest for our salvation, and we sing this hymn of thanksgiving unto thee. Rejoice, O holy Father Seraphim, bright luminary of the latter times. Inspired by thy Creator, thou didst seek the angelic life in the wilderness, renouncing worldly vanities and choosing the one thing needful, our Lord Jesus Christ. Adorned with faith and repentance, O wise Seraphim, thou didst put our old enemy to shame by exposing his deceptions and establishing Christ in the hearts of thy countrymen. Wherefore, being strengthened by the grace of God, we lift up our voices to thee. Rejoice, thou didst triumph over sin and death by thine unshakable love for truth. Rejoice, thou dost hearken to the prayers of those afflicted by temptations and sorrows. Rejoice, thou didst crucify thy fallen mind, and thereby gain the mind of the Holy Fathers. Rejoice, wondrous instructor, mighty with thy pen, yet meek in our presence. Rejoice, humble priest serving Christ and thy brethren with pain of heart. Rejoice, fountain of living water, springing forth from the parched land of America. Rejoice, O Holy Father Seraphim, bright luminary of the latter times.
Wow. Well, I don't mean to pump up your pride by saying this, but that's as good as anything that I've heard for a saint so far. It's perfectly in line with all the ones that I've seen.
Thank God. That's
Yeah.
that's been my whole desire, to have it be a product of the church and to be something that is right in line with what else we've seen blessed by the church.
My wife and I just did the service to St. Justin Popovich, and it was so full of Serbian names that I just had to, I'd be reading, I'd be like, and all of these guys, I had no idea what I was saying. So
I know
hopefully this will be all in English. Sorry, what was that?
I know what you mean. I have the same. I have the akathist to Saint Justine, and it's a tricky one. It's a tricky
It
one.
is. They had the language guide at the beginning of how to pronounce, the C and the C with a little dash on it, but you can't remember that 40 minutes into a service. What can you do?
Yeah.
Well, that sounds amazing. I mean, God willing, they could even put that someday at the back of the new biography, right? I mean, that would be the place to put it, wouldn't it?
Sure. I mean, it could be separate on its own, like we've seen with other saints. Yeah, I would love if it could be added to the back of the big biography, if the abridged biography ever comes to realization. Share it for free online. I don't care about the money personally. I mean, it won't
Yeah.
be up to me because, like I said, I've just been in the right place at the right time to do this. But it's not just me. It's other people too. So, yeah, God willing, we'll see it happen.
Now, in the Orthodox Church, I think you've been Orthodox longer than I have, right? I've been Orthodox just over 4 years.
7 years for me. Yeah.
Okay, so you might know a better answer to this than I have. So, is there anything, quote, wrong with saying an akathist or akathist, I'm not sure the pronunciation, to someone who has not yet been formally canonized? Or is that something that there's wiggle room on?
Well, I think most of the time, if you're going to have a saint canonized, there is already an akathist written for them. Um, I'm sure there are examples where that akathist was written, and then released and prayed by a majority of people at the canonization. Which I think would probably be what happens here if that day comes. But we have saints. I mean, we have the most immediate example I can think of is Father Seraphim himself writing an akathist to St. John, and St. John was canonized 12 years after Father Seraphim reposed. And if I remember right, Platina published the akathist at some point. It could have been after Father Seraphim's repose. I don't remember off the top of my head, but to drive home the point, St. John, we talk about, oh, you're praying to icons of praying before icons and making icons of saints who are not yet canonized. We do have to be cautious. We don't want to jump ahead of the mind of the church, of Christ in the church. But I feel like there's precedent to express our love for these men and women before their canonization. So St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco, he prayed before an icon of St. Herman, then Father Herman of Alaska, with a halo. It's up in the monastery in Platina. It's the same icons there. He prayed before that many times. And Father Herman was canonized, St. Herman, 4 years after St. John reposed. So I'm sure there's many other stories. I mean, of course, there's examples. Yeah, there's many other examples, but there's certainly precedent do that, but we should still have a sense of caution, I think. I'm not going to tell anyone they shouldn't call him Saint Seraphim of Platina, but I feel that it's good to wait on that. That it will be much more meaningful to have zero hesitation in saying such a thing if and when that day comes of his formal canonization. But in terms of how I function, at least I feel like I'm following the precedent of the saints and my spiritual father. There's no reason we can't ask for their intercessions. I mean, why else? How else are we going to have miracles of saints after their repose unless people are coming to them and asking for them to help them? So I think we kind of try to walk the royal path with these things, if you will.
I've certainly seen icons of him with a halo, including one that's presently in my house that my wife got before we were married and is now part of one of our icon corners. I had a hand-drawn icon done of on the icon. He has a halo and it says Saint Valeriu Gafencu, this Romanian martyr who was thrown in prison at 19 and never saw the light of day again, who I know is venerated as a saint throughout Romania by many people. Not everyone, but by many people. But I think you're right. I mean, the royal path would be the private veneration and the chanting of hymns, the asking for intercessory prayers, without, I guess, maybe publicly declaring them a saint or using that phrase every time, and just trying to err on the side of discernment. It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right.
So is there anything that I or the people watching this or listening to this can do that would help you and Hieromonk Damascene with this process?
I mean, in terms of the akathist, I don't think so. In terms of the canonization of Father Seraphim, I certainly think so. There are, of course, praying is number one, and there's nothing stopping anyone from writing their bishop, even if their bishop is in the Greek archdiocese or the Ukrainian archdiocese. I mean, ones that you wouldn't typically think of when it comes to Father Seraphim. I don't see any reason they can't write their bishop and express their desire to see some way or another the canonization of Father Seraphim. I think they can do that. I mean, they can certainly write the bishops of the Serbian Church, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. I mean, those are the more obvious ones because of the Serbians are the monastery in Platina is underneath their jurisdiction, and then of course Father Seraphim is a faithful son of the Russian Church abroad. But that's one thing that certainly comes to mind. I mean, there's of course other things. If you're skilled and gifted in iconography, writing, painting an icon of Father Seraphim, all those kind of things are doable. I've written a letter and sent it to a couple bishops expressing my desire to see him canonized. I'm continuing to try to work in that way or that direction with, communication wise. But yeah, there's nothing stopping people, and I'm sure there's other ways. Prayerfully being creative and finding another way to do that. I mean, it's a beautiful thing in the Orthodox Church that our veneration of saints and their ultimate canonization is extremely organic and it happens very naturally. And it's not like a top-down thing where we're checking a box and making sure that every, miracle is categorized precisely and all that. We don't have that. So it is ultimately up to the faithful to have such a swell of love and veneration for a saint where it becomes like it's almost like the bishops are compelled by the love of the faithful to simply or to recognize what the faithful have experienced. I think that's how it usually has happened for saints, especially those that are, canonized like Saint Paisios, Saint Porphyrios. their spiritual children are alive to see their canonization, right? I mean, that kind of thing, when it's that close, or within 50 years, 100 years even, yeah, I think the veneration starts there. People can be creative, be humble and be kind about it, and don't try to force the issue. It's all going to happen in God's timing, but there's nothing stopping people from writing a letter, from expressing their love in one way or another for a saint.
Well, I want to thank you for all the information you've shared about Father Seraphim and the hymn you wrote, and then reading, chanting part of it. That was really amazing to hear. As to your other project, Orthodox Wisdom, which again, if people are just tuning in or they missed it at the beginning, highly, highly recommend this project you do, which goes through saints from all different times, all different countries, all different archdioceses. Where, like, on what platforms besides YouTube can people follow that project too?
Yeah, so besides YouTube, you can find Orthodox Wisdom on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, on Stitcher, and then there's a number of other smaller ones that they get pushed out to. So, I mean, the main podcast platforms, as well as YouTube, you can find recordings of the lives and writings of the saints. My goal is to simply put the inspired words of the saints and the lives of the saints in my mouth and just read it. That's my goal. I inevitably I'm going to have some of my own opinion or some of my own views come through in what I choose to record or what I might say in the description. But I really try to focus on presenting us all with audio recordings of the lives and writings of the saints, because that's our spiritual nourishment.
Yeah, I've gained value out of listening to it on the way to work and back. For example, you got a nice 15-30 minute drive. It's a good time to throw one on and just listen to a saint talk about whatever the issue may be, because there really is nothing new under the sun. Half the stuff that was said in the 4th century they could have been writing about in modern America, right? Whether it's about pagans or chastity, it's the same teaching all throughout time. And listening to different saints from different periods of time, parts of the world, really helps to show that Christ, like you said, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I really appreciate your contribution to that sentiment with the project of Orthodox Wisdom too. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience? Anything else you're working on? Stuff you'd like to point people to about Father Seraphim or other saints or anything like that?
Well, there's one thing that it's possible it was just posted, but any time now, there should be an article I wrote about Father Seraphim and why he is so important for us Americans. I was asked to write this article, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. It's going to be posted on Gab News, and it's been turned in, so it's in the hands of the editor. So God willing, it'll be up soon, and it's brief, but it covers some key points about Father Seraphim, why he really speaks to us as Americans in these times. So people can look out for that on Gab News.
And for everyone watching or listening, I will have the links both to the Orthodox Wisdom YouTube channel and also to the Gab News article. If that's not out today, I will add it to the description later as soon as it does come out. So thank you so much, Tim, for joining us today and sharing all of this with us. I've learned a lot. I hope my audience has too. And God willing, someday we can look back on this once Father Seraphim is canonized and talk about the process, and then in the future people can see that this is part of the process, talking about it, writing hymns, spreading the word, and getting the ball rolling.
Beautiful. May it be so. May it be blessed.
All right, well, have a great day, Tim, and to everyone listening, God bless you, and go to confession tonight so you can go commune tomorrow in the morning. God bless everyone and have a good day.